There is a reason why people feel safe around Scorpio, and at the same time deeply afraid of crossing them. Scorpio is not dangerous because they are cruel. They are dangerous because they are kind until they are forced not to be. Most people only see one side of Scorpio. They see the loyalty, the calm presence, the way Scorpio listens without interrupting, the way they protect, quietly, love deeply, and stay when everyone else leaves. But what most people never understand is what happens after trust is broken. After years of studying Scorpio patterns, one truth became impossible to ignore. Scorpio does not change suddenly. They observe, they endure, they forgive more than people realize. And then something shifts. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. The same Scorpio who once gave warmth now becomes distant. The same Scorpio who defended you now goes silent. And the most frightening part is not their anger, it is their absence. In 2026, this pattern becomes even stronger. Because this is a year when Scorpio stops explaining, stops warning, and stops giving chances to people who already crossed the line. And that is why Scorpio is often described as the nicest people you will ever meet, and the most dangerous when provoked. Not because they want revenge, but because they understand something most people never do. Survival sometimes requires separation. Today I'm going to break down 20 reasons why Scorpio carries this rare paradox, why their kindness feels unforgettable, and why provoking them is a mistake people never forget. These are not surface traits. These are survival mechanisms formed through pain, loyalty, and emotional depth. And reason number 2 is the one that explains everything people get wrong about Scorpio. Before we begin, take a moment. If you are a Scorpio, or if a Scorpio has ever changed your life, let me know in the comments. And now, let's begin. Reason 1. Scorpio is loyal to the core, and that loyalty has a breaking point. Scorpio loyalty is not casual. It is not something they offer lightly, and it is never temporary. When a Scorpio chooses you, they choose you with their entire emotional system. They don't just show up when it's convenient. They stay when things get uncomfortable, complicated, or heavy. They defend quietly, protect instinctively, and sacrifice without announcing it. This is why Scorpio is often remembered as one of the nicest people you will ever meet. Their loyalty feels safe. It feels grounding. It feels like someone finally has your back without asking for anything in return. But here is what most people misunderstand. Scorpio loyalty is not blind. It is conditional on truth. After years of observing Scorpio behavior, one pattern repeats without exception. Scorpio can forgive mistakes. Scorpio can forgive distance. But Scorpio does not forgive betrayal of trust. The moment they realize their loyalty was taken for granted, something changes internally. Not on the surface, not immediately, but deep inside. They stop giving access. They stop explaining themselves. They stop investing emotional energy where it is no longer respected. And this is where Scorpio becomes dangerous, not because they attack, but because they withdraw completely. People expect arguments. They expect anger. They expect drama. What they get instead is silence. This silence is not weakness. It is a boundary being enforced at a soul level. A Scorpio who has reached this point will not beg, chase, or seek closure. They will cut emotional cords cleanly and move forward with quiet precision. And once that decision is made, there is no returning to who they were before. This is the part that makes Scorpio impossible to control. You cannot manipulate someone who is willing to walk away from what they once valued most. Life lesson for Scorpio. Your loyalty is sacred, but it must be protected. When you give endlessly to people who do not honor it, you don't become kinder, you become depleted. Learning when to stay and when to step back is not cruelty. It is survival. Your power is not in how much you endure. It is in knowing when loyalty has turned into self-betrayal. If you've ever reached a point where you became quiet instead of angry, that was your strength awakening. Comment if this resonates with you. Have you ever walked away silently after giving everything? And once you understand how deeply Scorpio protects loyalty, you begin to see why their emotional intelligence goes even further, because Scorpio doesn't just feel their own emotions. They absorb everyone else's too. And that brings us to the next reason. Reason 2, Scorpio feels everything, and that is why they are so hard to control. Scorpio does not experience emotions lightly. They don't skim the surface of feelings the way most people do. They go straight to the depth. When a Scorpio cares, they don't just understand what you're saying, they feel what you're feeling. Sometimes even before you know how to name it yourself. This is what makes Scorpio incredibly comforting to be around. They listen without interrupting. They sit with you in silence without rushing to fix you. They sense emotional shifts others completely miss. Many people mistake this for gentleness, But emotional depth is not softness. It is sensitivity, sharpened by awareness. After years of observing Scorpio relationships, one truth stands out clearly. Scorpio empathy is not passive, it is absorbing. They take in moods, tension, unspoken resentment, and emotional undercurrents. They remember how people made them feel even when no words were exchanged. And because of this, they see through emotional games quickly. This is why Scorpio cannot be emotionally controlled. You cannot fake sincerity around someone who feels energy instead of just hearing words. You cannot manipulate someone who notices emotional inconsistencies instantly. And you cannot hide intention from someone whose intuition operates beneath logic. But the same emotional depth becomes dangerous when Scorpio is hurt, because the deeper someone feels, the deeper they are wounded. When Scorpio realizes their empathy has been used against them, they do not explode. They do not accuse. They internalize. They replay conversations. They remember tones. They connect patterns. And once clarity arrives, something closes. They don't become cruel. They become selective. They stop giving emotional access to people who treat vulnerability as weakness. They no longer explain what should have been obvious. And they begin pulling their energy inward. This withdrawal is what confuses people the most. One day, Scorpio understands you deeply. The next, you feel shut out. Not because they changed suddenly, but because they finally saw clearly. This is where Scorpio becomes dangerous, not through aggression, but through emotional detachment that cannot be reversed. Life lesson for Scorpio. Your empathy is a gift, not a resource to be drained. Feeling deeply does not mean you owe everyone emotional access. When you continue to absorb pain that is not yours, you don't become compassionate. You become exhausted. Learning to protect your emotional boundaries is not coldness. It is wisdom. You are not here to carry everyone's emotions. You are here to understand them without losing yourself. If you've ever felt overwhelmed without knowing why, it wasn't weakness. It was your intuition working overtime. Comment if this resonates with you. Have you ever felt someone's emotions more intensely than your own? And once you understand how deeply Scorpio feels, you'll realize why they are always watching quietly in the background. Because Scorpio doesn't just feel emotions. They observe everything. And that leads us to the next reason. Reason 3. Scorpio watches in silence, and that silence is strategic. Scorpio is rarely the loudest person in the room. They don't rush to speak. They don't need to dominate conversations to feel powerful. Instead, they observe. From the moment Scorpio enters a space, their attention sharpens. They notice tone changes. They notice pauses between words. They notice body language others ignore. This is why many people underestimate Scorpio at first. Silence is often mistaken for disinterest or passivity. But in Scorpio, silence is information gathering. After years of studying Scorpio behavior, one pattern appears consistently. Scorpio prefers to understand before reacting. They watch how people treat others when no one is watching. They notice inconsistencies between words and actions. They register emotional shifts long before they become obvious. This makes Scorpio extremely difficult to deceive. You can rehearse your story. You can polish your explanation. But you cannot hide patterns from someone who studies behavior instead of listening for excuses. This is why Scorpio is so hard to control. They do not react impulsively. They wait. They let people reveal themselves naturally. And when Scorpio finally speaks or acts, it is not guesswork. It is confirmation. This is also why provoking a Scorpio often backfires. People assume that because Scorpio stayed quiet, nothing was noticed. They assume the moment passed. They assume the behavior was forgotten. It wasn't. Scorpio simply stored the information. And when the moment comes to act, it is calm, precise, and irreversible. Not fueled by rage, fueled by clarity. This quiet awareness is what makes Scorpio dangerous when pushed. Not because they seek confrontation, but because when they decide something is no longer acceptable, they already know exactly why. Life lesson for Scorpio. Your silence is powerful, but it must be intentional. Observing without reacting allows you to see truth clearly. But staying silent too long can also cost you connection. Wisdom is knowing when to watch and when to speak before distance becomes permanent. You are not obligated to explain everything you notice, but you are responsible for protecting your peace once you see the truth. If you've ever waited quietly and later realized you were right all along, that wasn't luck. That was your awareness doing its job. Comment if this resonates with you. Have you ever noticed something early but stayed silent? And once you understand how much Scorpio sees without speaking, you begin to understand why their presence feels so intense. Because silence combined with depth creates mystery. And that brings us to the next reason. Reason 4. Scorpio carries a mysterious aura, and that mystery is a form of power. There is something about Scorpio that draws attention without effort. They don't need to speak loudly. They don't need to perform. Their presence alone creates curiosity. People often describe it as intensity, but intensity is only the surface. What truly makes Scorpio magnetic is restraint. They do not reveal themselves quickly. They do not explain their inner world to earn approval. They allow others to wonder. After years of observing Scorpio dynamics, one truth becomes clear. Scorpio understands that mystery creates respect. They know that not everything should be exposed. Not every thought should be shared. Not every emotion should be displayed. This is why people feel drawn to Scorpio. There is depth beneath the surface, and depth invites curiosity. But this same mystery is what makes Scorpio difficult to control. You cannot manipulate someone whose inner world you cannot access. You cannot predict someone who does not move according to expectation. And you cannot pressure someone who is comfortable holding back. Scorpio moves on instinct, not explanation. When they sense a shift in trust or energy, they don't announce it. They don't negotiate it. They simply pull inward. To others, this feels sudden and confusing. One moment Scorpio is present and engaged. The next they feel distant and unreachable. But nothing about it was sudden. Scorpio had already processed the change internally. They simply chose not to expose it. This is where their mystery becomes dangerous when provoked. People try to push demand answers or force reactions. And Scorpio responds by closing even further, not out of punishment, out of self-protection. Once a Scorpio withdraws behind that inner wall, access is no longer guaranteed. Their mystery becomes a boundary, and boundaries are not meant to be crossed. Life lesson for Scorpio: your mystery is not something to apologize for. You are not required to explain your depth to be understood. However, mystery must serve clarity, not isolation. When you hide everything, connection fades. When you reveal nothing, distance grows. Power lies in choosing what to share and what to protect. If you've ever felt misunderstood, simply because you didn't explain yourself, remember this: not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Comment if this resonates with you. Have you ever noticed people become more curious the less you revealed? And once you understand Scorpio's mystery, you begin to see how deeply they listen when others speak. Because behind that silence, Scorpio is absorbing everything. And that brings us to the next reason. Reason 5. Scorpio listens intensely, and that attention is never forgotten. When a Scorpio listens to you, it feels different. They are not waiting for their turn to speak. They are not distracted. They are fully present. Their attention locks in quietly, almost invisibly. They notice how you choose your words. They notice what you hesitate to say. They notice what you avoid completely. This is why conversations with Scorpio feel meaningful. You feel seen. You feel understood. You feel like what you say actually matters. But this level of listening is not accidental. After years of observing Scorpio communication, one pattern is consistent. Scorpio listens to understand, not to respond. They collect details others dismiss. They remember emotional context, not just facts. They store conversations not as information but as emotional data. This is what makes Scorpio kind. They don't interrupt your process. They don't minimize your feelings. They let you unfold at your own pace. But this same ability becomes dangerous when trust is broken. Because once Scorpio has listened deeply, they know exactly where someone is emotionally vulnerable. Not because they wanted to use it against you, but because they understand you fully. If Scorpio realizes that someone lied, manipulated, or spoke with hidden intent, their listening turns inward. They stop engaging. They stop offering emotional space. They stop asking questions. And the person who once felt deeply heard now feels completely shut out. This is where people get confused. They assume Scorpio changed. They assume something small caused the shift. In reality, Scorpio simply connected the dots. They replayed conversations. They noticed inconsistencies. They recognized patterns that no longer aligned with truth. And once that clarity arrives, access is revoked. This is why Scorpio is so hard to control. You cannot manipulate someone who remembers everything you revealed while believing they were being heard. Their silence after that point is not ignorance. It is final awareness. Life lesson for Scorpio: your ability to listen deeply is a gift, but it must be protected. Not everyone who opens up deserves continued access. And not every story you hear requires emotional investment. Listening does not mean obligation. Understanding does not mean endurance. When you stop listening to people who misuse honesty, you are not becoming cold. You are becoming conscious. If you've ever gone quiet after realizing the truth, that was not withdrawal. That was discernment. Comment if this resonates with you. Have you ever remembered something someone said that later changed everything? And once you understand how deeply Scorpio listens, you begin to understand why they protect the people they love so fiercely. Because loyalty once earned becomes instinct. And that leads us to the next reason. Reason 6. Scorpio is fiercely protective, and that instinct has no off switch. When Scorpio loves, it is not passive. It is not symbolic. It is instinctive. Once someone is inside Scorpio's inner circle, protection becomes automatic. They don't need to think about it. They don't need to announce it. They simply step in. Scorpio defends quietly. They shield without drawing attention. They absorb pressure so others don't have to. This is why being loved by a Scorpio feels powerful. You feel backed. You feel guarded. You feel like someone will stand between you and harm without hesitation. But the same instinct is what makes Scorpio dangerous when provoked. After years of studying Scorpio loyalty patterns, one truth remains constant. Scorpio does not tolerate threats to what they love. If someone disrespects, manipulates, or harms a person, Scorpio cares about their calm disappears internally. Not into chaos, into focus. They don't react emotionally, they react strategically. Scorpio becomes calculated, observant, and unwavering. They identify the source of the threat. They assess intentions. They act only when they are certain. This is not aggression, it is defense refined through emotional intelligence. People often misunderstand this side of Scorpio. They assume the reaction is excessive. They assume it is personal. But to Scorpio, protection is non-negotiable. You cannot control someone whose loyalty activates their survival instincts. You cannot intimidate someone who is no longer acting for themselves. This is where Scorpio becomes unstoppable, because fear no longer has influence. And once Scorpio decides someone is a danger to what they love, distance is enforced permanently. There are no second chances at that level. Life lesson for Scorpio. Your protective nature is powerful, but it must be guided by discernment. Not every battle deserves your energy. Not every conflict requires your intervention. Protecting others should never cost you your peace. When you choose carefully who enters your inner circle, your protection becomes a strength rather than a burden. If you've ever felt exhausted from defending someone who didn't protect you back, that wasn't loyalty. That was imbalance. Learning to step back does not make you less strong. It makes you wise. Comment if this resonates with you. Have you ever protected someone more than they protected you? And once you understand how fiercely Scorpio protects their own, you begin to understand why their emotions run so deep. Because protection is fueled by feeling. And that brings us to the next reason. Reason 7. Scorpio takes emotions seriously. There is no halfway with them. Scorpio does not approach emotions lightly. They don't flirt with feelings. They don't test connections just to see what happens. When a Scorpio commits emotionally, it is intentional. They are present with their mind, their body, and their intuition aligned. They don't pretend. They don't dilute what they feel to stay comfortable. This is why being close to a Scorpio feels intense. Their love is focused. Their attention is immersive. Their presence makes moments feel heavier, more real. After years of observing Scorpio emotional patterns, one truth stands out clearly. Scorpio does not experience emotions in fragments. They feel fully or not at all. This depth is what makes Scorpio incredibly genuine. There is no performance in their affection, no shallow reassurance, no emotional shortcuts. But this same intensity is what makes them dangerous when provoked. Because when someone disrespects Scorpio emotionally, it is not perceived as a small mistake. It is perceived as a violation. Scorpio does not brush off emotional harm. They internalize it, they analyze it, they carry it. And once they realize that their emotional depth is not being respected, they do not argue endlessly or seek validation. They pull away, not impulsively, not dramatically, but decisively. People often misread this reaction. They assume Scorpio is overreacting. They assume time will smooth things over. But Scorpio does not return to emotional spaces that have proven unsafe. This is why Scorpio cannot be controlled emotionally. You cannot pressure someone who refuses to engage halfway. You cannot negotiate depth with someone who requires authenticity. They either meet you where you are or they leave. There is no emotional middle ground. Life lesson for Scorpio. Your emotional intensity is not a flaw. It is the source of your authenticity. But depth requires boundaries. Not everyone deserves full access to your inner world. And not every connection is meant to carry the weight you bring. Learning to pace your emotional investment is not betrayal of self. It is protection of your energy. If you've ever felt drained after giving everything emotionally, it wasn't because you felt too much. It was because you gave too much to the wrong place. Comment if this resonates with you. Have you ever felt misunderstood because you love deeply? And once you understand how seriously Scorpio takes emotions, you begin to see why their intuition is so sharp. Because deep feeling always sharpens perception. And that leads us to the next reason. Reason 8. Scorpio is incredibly intuitive. They sense the truth before it is spoken. Scorpio does not rely only on logic to understand the world. They rely on perception. They walk into a room and feel when something is off. They notice shifts in energy before anyone says a word. They sense hesitation, hidden tension, and unspoken intentions instantly. This is not imagination, it is intuition sharpened through experience. After years of studying Scorpio patterns, one truth becomes undeniable. Scorpio trusts what they feel more than what they are told. They listen beyond words. They observe beyond behavior. They connect subtle signals into a complete picture. This is why lying to a Scorpio rarely works. You might explain yourself perfectly, you might sound convincing, but if the energy does not match the story Scorpio notices, they may not confront you immediately. They may not accuse or challenge you on the spot. Instead, they watch. They give space for truth to reveal itself. And when it does, Scorpio does not argue with their intuition. They adjust their behavior accordingly. This is where Scorpio becomes dangerous when provoked. Because once intuition confirms betrayal, manipulation, or hidden intent, Scorpio does not need proof from others. They already know. They stop trusting. They stop engaging emotionally. They stop giving benefit of the doubt. And from that moment on, you are dealing with a Scorpio who is no longer guessing. You are dealing with certainty. This is why Scorpio cannot be controlled through confusion or mixed signals. You cannot mislead someone who reads beneath the surface. You cannot gaslight someone who already feels the truth in their body. Their intuition becomes a compass. And once it points in a direction, they do not look back. Life lesson for Scorpio. Your intuition is one of your greatest strengths, but it must be balanced with awareness. Not every feeling requires immediate action, and not every signal demands confrontation. Learning when to trust your intuition and when to pause for clarity is what transforms instinct into wisdom. When you honor your inner knowing without becoming reactive, your power becomes calm instead of destructive. If you've ever sensed the truth before it was confirmed, that wasn't coincidence. That was your intuition protecting you. Comment if this resonates with you. Have you ever known something was wrong before you could explain why? And once you understand how strong Scorpio intuition is, you begin to understand why they never forget betrayal. Because intuition remembers what the mind tries to ignore. And that leads us to the next reason. Reason 9. Scorpio never forgets betrayal because memory is emotional, not logical. Scorpio does not remember betrayal the way most people do. They don't store it as an event. They store it as a feeling. They remember how their body reacted. They remember the moment trust cracked. They remember the shift in energy when something stopped feeling safe. This is why Scorpio forgiveness is often misunderstood. After years of observing Scorpio responses to betrayal, one truth remains consistent. Scorpio may forgive behavior, but they never forget the emotional impact. They can move forward, they can remain calm, they can even continue interacting. But inside, something has been permanently recorded. This is not resentment, it is self-preservation. Scorpio understands that forgetting emotional wounds invites repetition. So they remember not to punish others, but to protect themselves. This is where Scorpio becomes dangerous when provoked. Because once betrayal is recognized, Scorpio no longer reacts emotionally. They react strategically. They do not explode. They do not seek revenge impulsively. They observe patterns, timing, and intention. And if the situation escalates beyond tolerance, their response is precise and calculated. People often expect Scorpio anger to be loud. What they encounter instead is distance, boundaries, and irreversible decisions. This is why Scorpio cannot be controlled through apologies alone. Words may soften the surface, but emotional memory holds the truth. Once Scorpio understands who someone becomes under pressure, they adjust their level of access accordingly. And access once reduced is rarely restored. This emotional memory is what makes Scorpio both kind and dangerous. Kind because they do not react impulsively. Dangerous because when they act, it is final. Life lesson for Scorpio. Remembering pain is not the same as living in it. Your memory exists to guide you, not to trap you. Holding awareness without holding resentment is what transforms wounds into wisdom. You do not need to forget to heal. You need to understand what the memory is teaching you. If you've ever stayed calm while remembering everything, that was not weakness. That was control. Comment if this resonates with you. Have you ever forgiven someone but never trusted them the same way again? And once you understand how Scorpio remembers betrayal, you begin to understand why they are not afraid of confrontation. Because clarity removes fear. And that brings us to the next reason. Reason 10. Scorpio is not afraid of confrontation. They face tension with control. Scorpio does not seek conflict. They don't enjoy drama. They don't provoke reactions for attention. But when confrontation becomes necessary, they do not avoid it. After years of observing Scorpio under pressure, one pattern stands out clearly. Scorpio does not fear tension. They understand it. While others raise their voices or become defensive, Scorpio becomes focused. They listen carefully. They choose their words deliberately. They look directly at the issue instead of circling around it. This is why confrontation with a Scorpio feels different. There is no chaos, no emotional theatrics, just clarity. They don't threaten. They state what they see. And that alone is unsettling to people who rely on confusion or avoidance. This is where Scorpio becomes dangerous when provoked. Because confrontation for Scorpio is not about winning an argument. It is about reclaiming control. Once they decide a line has been crossed, they address it directly. They do not soften the truth to make others comfortable. They do not dilute reality to maintain harmony. They speak with calm certainty. And once something is said, it cannot be unsaid. This fearlessness is what makes Scorpio impossible to manipulate. You cannot intimidate someone who is comfortable sitting in discomfort. You cannot dominate someone who does not flinch under pressure. Scorpio understands that unresolved tension does more damage than honest confrontation. So when they speak, it is intentional. And once they confront something, they do not revisit it endlessly. They expect respect, not excuses. Life lesson for Scorpio. Your ability to face confrontation is a strength, but it must be guided by intention. Not every truth needs to be spoken immediately, and not every confrontation needs to be pursued. Choose clarity over control. Choose honesty over dominance. When confrontation serves understanding, it builds respect. When it serves ego, it creates distance. If you've ever spoken calmly while others expected anger, that was not emotional detachment. That was mastery. Comment if this resonates with you. Have you ever stayed calm while addressing something difficult? And once you understand Scorpio's relationship with confrontation, you begin to understand why their calm can feel so unsettling. Because when Scorpio goes quiet, they are not surrendering. They are preparing. And that leads us to the next reason. Reason 11. Scorpio's calm is dangerous because it is never empty. Scorpio does not react the way most people expect. When tension rises, they do not rush to defend themselves. They do not explode. They do not panic. They go quiet. To many people, this calm looks like indifference, like surrender, like weakness. It isn't. After years of observing Scorpio in moments of conflict, one truth becomes clear. Scorpio's calm is not peace. It is processing. While others speak emotionally, Scorpio is analyzing. They are replaying what was said. They are measuring intention. They are deciding what matters and what no longer does. This is why provoking the Scorpio is such a mistake. People assume silence means forgiveness. They assume the moment has passed. They assume the issue is resolved. It hasn't even begun. Scorpio's calm is the eye of the storm, still focused and observant. And when they finally act, it is not driven by impulse. It is driven by certainty. This is what makes Scorpio dangerous when pushed. They do not lash out. They do not seek emotional release. They act with purpose. Their response may come later, quietly, without warning. But when it comes, it is final. You cannot control someone whose calm allows them to think clearly under pressure. You cannot overpower someone who remains grounded while others lose control. Scorpio understands that emotional chaos weakens position, so they wait. And waiting gives them strength. This is why people often say, you never know what a Scorpio is thinking. That uncertainty is not accidental, it is protection. Life lesson for Scorpio. Your calm is powerful, but it must not become avoidance. Processing in silence gives you clarity, but clarity must eventually lead to conscious action. Do not stay quiet to protect others from discomfort. Stay quiet to protect your own understanding. When you choose to speak after calm reflection, your words carry weight. If you've ever stayed silent while everything inside you was moving, that wasn't emptiness. That was preparation. Comment if this resonates with you. Have you ever gone quiet before making a decisive change? And once you understand how dangerous Scorpio's calm can be, you begin to understand why they reveal so little about themselves. Because control comes from discretion. And that brings us to the next reason. Reason 12. Scorpio does not reveal their cards easily. They control access, not people. Scorpio is often misunderstood as secretive or closed off. In reality, they are selective. They do not share their inner world with everyone they meet. They observe first. They test consistency. They watch how people handle truth, pressure, and vulnerability. After years of studying Scorpio behavior, one pattern is clear. Scorpio does not hide out of fear. They withhold out of discernment. They understand that information is power, and power when given too freely becomes a liability. This is why Scorpio rarely reveals everything at once. They show layers slowly. They allow access in stages, not to manipulate but to protect what matters. This is also why Scorpio is so difficult to control. You cannot influence someone when you do not fully understand their motives. You cannot predict someone who only reveals what is necessary. And you cannot pressure someone who is comfortable holding back. Scorpio does not need to dominate to stay in control. They simply manage access. When trust is present, doors open naturally. When trust is broken, those doors close without explanation. This is where Scorpio becomes dangerous when provoked. People often try to force clarity. They demand explanations. They push for emotional exposure. And Scorpio responds by retreating further, not as punishment, as protection. Once access is reduced, it is rarely restored to the same level. Because Scorpio does not rewind emotional decisions. They move forward with new boundaries. This quiet control is what unsettles people most. There is no argument to win, no behavior to negotiate. Access is either granted or it isn't. Life lesson for Scorpio. You are not obligated to explain your depth to everyone. Privacy is not deception. It is wisdom. However, withholding must serve clarity, not control. When you share nothing, connection fades. When you share selectively, respect grows. Your power lies in choosing who gets to know you and how much. If you've ever felt safer after pulling back emotionally, that wasn't avoidance. That was self-respect. Comment if this resonates with you. Have you ever limited access instead of trying to control a situation? And once you understand how Scorpio manages access, you begin to understand why their passion feels so intense. Because when they finally open fully, nothing is held back. And that leads us to the next reason. Reason 13. Scorpio is passionate in everything, and that intensity changes the outcome. Scorpio does not do anything halfway. They don't invest lightly. They don't commit casually. When something matters to a Scorpio, it becomes personal. Their focus sharpens. Their energy concentrates. Their emotions align behind a single direction. This is why Scorpio passion feels overwhelming to some people. It is not scattered. It is deliberate. After years of observing Scorpio across relationships, careers, and personal transformation, one truth becomes clear. Scorpio's passion is not emotional excess. It is emotional precision. They channel their energy fully into what they believe in. When they love with presence. When they work with obsession. When they create with depth. This intensity is what makes Scorpio incredibly effective. They don't just participate, they transform whatever they touch. But this same passion is what makes them dangerous when provoked. Because when that focused energy is betrayed, dismissed, or disrespected, it does not disappear. It turns inward. Passion becomes withdrawal. Devotion becomes distance. Engagement becomes silence. Scorpio does not explode when hurt. They redirect. And redirected passion is powerful. This is why people are often shocked by how quickly Scorpio can move on. What they are really witnessing is not detachment, but reallocation of energy. Once Scorpio decides something no longer deserves their passion, it no longer receives their presence. You cannot control someone who is willing to remove their energy completely. You cannot negotiate with someone who has already shifted internally. This is what makes Scorpio's passion both beautiful and dangerous. When it is given, it changes everything. When it is withdrawn, everything collapses quietly. Life lesson for Scorpio. Your passion is your engine, but it must be directed consciously. Not every person, project, or promise deserves your full intensity, and not every loss requires you to shut down completely. Learning where to place your passion is the difference between transformation and exhaustion. When you choose intentionally, your intensity becomes creation instead of reaction. If you've ever felt relief after pulling your energy away, that wasn't indifference. That was alignment. Comment if this resonates with you. Have you ever redirected your passion and watched your life change? And once you understand how Scorpio channels passion, you begin to understand why they make people feel uniquely seen. Because when Scorpio focuses on you, it feels singular. And that brings us to the next reason. Reason 14. Scorpio makes you feel unique, and their absence is just as powerful. When Scorpio gives you attention, it doesn't feel casual. It feels intentional. They don't spread themselves thin. They don't divide their focus. When you have their presence, it feels like you are the only one in the room. Scorpio asks questions others don't think to ask. They remember details you forgot you shared. They notice changes in your tone, your mood, your energy. This is why people feel deeply connected to Scorpio. They don't just feel liked, they feel chosen. After years of observing Scorpio bonds, one truth stands out. Scorpio does not create many connections, but the ones they create are immersive. Their presence makes people feel important, understood, and seen, and because of that, their connections leave a lasting mark. But this same intensity is what makes Scorpio dangerous when provoked, because the moment trust breaks, that presence disappears. Not slowly, not with explanation, but completely. The warmth fades, the attention vanishes, and the silence that replaces it feels louder than any argument. People often underestimate how powerful absence can be. They expect confrontation. They expect closure. What they receive instead is distance. This is why Scorpio cannot be controlled through emotional leverage. You cannot guilt someone who no longer offers access. You cannot negotiate with someone who has already disengaged internally. Scorpio does not withdraw to punish. They withdraw to protect their energy. And once they stop making you feel unique, that chapter is over. This is what makes their love unforgettable and their absence impossible to ignore. Life lesson for Scorpio. Your presence is valuable because it is focused. But remember this, withdrawing should be a conscious choice, not an emotional reflex. When you leave without clarity, others are left confused, and you are left carrying unspoken weight. Learning when to communicate and when to walk away silently is part of emotional mastery. If you've ever noticed how powerful your absence felt, that wasn't manipulation, that was impact. Comment if this resonates with you. Have you ever walked away and felt the energy shift instantly? And once you understand how Scorpio presence works, you begin to understand why they are so resilient. Because someone who can detach completely can always rebuild. And that leads us to the next reason. Reason 15. Scorpio is incredibly resilient. They rise stronger after every loss. Scorpio does not collapse when life breaks them. They transform. Pain does not end them, it reshapes them. When a Scorpio goes through loss, betrayal, or failure, they don't stay in denial. They don't escape into distraction. They go inward. After years of observing Scorpio through major life turning points, one truth becomes undeniable. Scorpio does not avoid suffering. They face it directly. They sit with it. They dissect it. They extract meaning from it. This is why Scorpio resilience feels different from simple toughness. It is not endurance. It is adaptation. They allow themselves to feel the pain fully, but they do not let it define their future. And this is what makes Scorpio dangerous when provoked. Because someone who has already survived emotional destruction is not easily threatened. They have been at the bottom. They have rebuilt themselves before. They know they can do it again. This makes Scorpio impossible to control through fear. You cannot intimidate someone who is not afraid of starting over. You cannot break someone who knows how to rebuild from ashes. When Scorpio rises, they do not return as the same person. They return clearer, stronger, more selective. And they remember who was there and who wasn't. This memory is not bitterness, it is awareness. People often mistake Scorpio's resilience for coldness. In reality, it is earned strength. They don't cling to what hurt them, they outgrow it. And once Scorpio has outgrown a situation, there is no pulling them back into it. Life lesson for Scorpio. Your ability to rise is one of your greatest gifts, but do not confuse resilience with self-sacrifice. You do not need to endure endless pain to prove your strength. You are strong because you know how to leave, rebuild, and evolve. Every time you rise, ask yourself what the experience taught you, not what it cost you. If you've ever looked back and realized you survived something you thought would destroy you, that wasn't luck. That was your nature. Comment if this resonates with you. Have you ever rebuilt your life after something ended completely? And once you understand Scorpio's resilience, you begin to understand why they speak so little, but act so decisively. Because strength does not need noise. And that leads us to the next reason. Reason 16. Scorpio speaks little, but their actions are final. Scorpio does not talk to feel important. They do not make promises to sound good. They do not explain themselves to be understood. They let actions speak. When a Scorpio commits to something, they follow through quietly. No announcements, no justification, just movement. After years of observing Scorpio decision-making, one pattern becomes clear. Scorpio does not act impulsively. They act decisively. They think deeply before moving. They measure consequences. They anticipate outcomes. And once they act, they do not second-guess themselves. This is why Scorpio kindness feels reliable. When they show up, they stay. When they support, they commit fully. But this same trait is what makes Scorpio dangerous when provoked. Because when a Scorpio decides to withdraw, there are no dramatic speeches, no emotional ultimatums, no attempts to gain sympathy. They simply stop. Stop reaching out, stop engaging, stop investing energy. And that silence is not temporary. People often misunderstand this. They think Scorpio is waiting to be convinced. They think time will soften the decision. It won't. Once a Scorpio has acted internally, their external behavior follows with precision. You cannot control someone who does not need to explain their choices. You cannot influence someone who has already accepted the outcome. Scorpio does not need validation after making a decision. They trust their process. This is why their actions feel so final. There is no back and forth, no emotional bargaining, just movement forward. Life lesson for Scorpio. Your restraint gives your actions weight. But finality must come from clarity, not exhaustion. Do not wait until you are drained to act. Speak when boundaries are crossed, not only when they are broken. When you act from awareness instead of build up your decisions, feel lighter, and your peace lasts longer. If you've ever acted without explanation and never looked back, that wasn't avoidance. That was resolution. Comment if this resonates with you. Have you ever made a quiet decision that changed everything? And once you understand how final Scorpio actions can be, you begin to understand why they can turn cold so suddenly. Because detachment for Scorpio is a defense. And that leads us to the next reason. Reason 17. Scorpio can go cold in seconds because detachment is self-protection. Scorpio warmth is real. When they are open, they are present, attentive, and emotionally available. Their energy feels close. Their care feels intentional. But when a line is crossed, that warmth can disappear instantly. Not gradually, not with warning, but completely. After years of observing Scorpio emotional shifts, one truth becomes clear. Scorpio detachment is not moodiness. It is instinct. The moment they sense betrayal, disrespect, or emotional danger, something inside shuts down. This is not cruelty. It is containment. Scorpio understands that once trust is compromised, continuing emotional openness becomes unsafe, so they pull back. Their voice changes, their presence fades, their attention moves elsewhere. To others, this feels shocking. They remember the warmth and cannot understand where it went. But nothing disappeared. Scorpio simply redirected their energy inward. This is why Scorpio becomes dangerous when provoked. You cannot guilt someone who no longer feels obligated to explain. You cannot manipulate someone who has emotionally disengaged. And you cannot pull warmth from someone who has decided to protect themselves. Scorpio does not detach to punish, they detach to survive. Once this internal decision is made, emotional access is no longer available, and trying to force it only pushes them further away. This is what makes Scorpio so difficult to control. They do not cling to connections that feel unsafe. They do not argue to be understood. They leave quietly and let distance do the work. Life lesson for Scorpio. Your ability to detach protects you, but it should not replace communication entirely. Detachment without clarity can leave unfinished emotional loops, and unfinished loops drain energy. Learning when to express boundaries early prevents the need for sudden emotional shutdown. You do not owe warmth to those who cross your limits, but you owe yourself honesty about when and why you pull away. If you've ever gone cold after realizing something could not be repaired, that wasn't emotional numbness. That was self-respect. Comment if this resonates with you. Have you ever felt your warmth disappear in an instant? And once you understand Scorpio detachment, you begin to understand why they do not need crowds to feel complete. Because solitude for Scorpio is strength. And that leads us to the next reason. Reason 18. Scorpio does not need a crowd. Their independence is unshakable. Scorpio has never been drawn to crowds for validation. They do not measure their worth by how many people surround them. They measure it by depth. They prefer a small circle they trust over a large circle they cannot rely on. After years of observing Scorpio social patterns, one truth remains consistent. Scorpio is comfortable standing alone. They do not fear solitude, they use it. When Scorpio withdraws, it is not because they feel rejected. It is because they are recalibrating. They step back to think clearly, feel honestly, and realign with themselves. This independence is what makes Scorpio kind. They do not cling, they do not demand attention. They allow people to come and go naturally. But this same independence is what makes Scorpio dangerous when provoked. You cannot threaten someone who is not afraid of being alone. You cannot manipulate someone who does not depend on approval. And you cannot control someone who knows they will survive without you. When Scorpio realizes a connection lacks depth or sincerity, they do not negotiate their standards. They walk away. Quietly, completely. This is what shocks people the most. They expect resistance. They expect bargaining. Instead, they get absence. Scorpio understands something most people struggle to accept. Peace is better than forced connection. And once Scorpio chooses solitude over compromise, that choice is final. This independence is not coldness, it is clarity. Life lesson for Scorpio. Your independence is a strength, but it should not become isolation. Choosing solitude to protect your energy is healthy. Using solitude to avoid vulnerability is not. True independence allows connection without dependence. You do not need many people around you to feel whole, but you deserve a few who meet you in depth. If you've ever walked away knowing you would be fine alone, that wasn't pride. That was self-trust. Comment if this resonates with you. Have you ever chosen peace over staying connected? And once you understand Scorpio independence, you begin to understand why they are not afraid of their own darkness. Because solitude is where Scorpio meets themselves fully. And that leads us to the next reason. Reason 19. Scorpio is not afraid of the dark side because they have already faced it. Scorpio is no stranger to darkness. They have felt pain deeply. They have confronted loss, betrayal, and inner chaos head-on. While others avoid uncomfortable emotions, Scorpio goes toward them. After years of studying Scorpio transformation cycles, one truth becomes clear. Scorpio does not deny their shadow. They integrate it. They understand anger. They understand jealousy. They understand grief and obsession. And instead of pretending these emotions don't exist, they learn how to sit with them. This is why Scorpio emotional strength feels different. It is not innocence. It is awareness. They know what they are capable of when pushed. They know what darkness can do if left unconscious, and that knowledge gives them control. This is where Scorpio becomes dangerous when provoked. You cannot intimidate someone who has already faced their worst fears internally. You cannot threaten someone who has survived emotional destruction and rebuilt themselves. When Scorpio is pushed too far, they know how to access their shadow without being consumed by it. Not to harm unnecessarily, but to defend themselves decisively. This is what people misunderstand most about Scorpio. They are not cold. They are not cruel. They are conscious of their power. And someone who understands their own darkness is far more dangerous than someone who denies it. Because Scorpio does not act blindly. They act with awareness of consequences. This makes them impossible to control through fear or shame. They have already explored those inner territories. And once Scorpio has faced their shadow, they no longer fear it. Life lesson for Scorpio. Your darkness is not something to suppress. It is something to understand. When you acknowledge your shadow, it loses the power to control you unconsciously. But awareness must be paired with responsibility. Knowing your power means knowing when not to use it. True mastery is not destroying others. It is choosing restraint when destruction is possible. If you've ever accepted parts of yourself you once feared, that wasn't weakness. That was evolution. Comment if this resonates with you. Have you ever grown stronger after facing your own darkness? And once you understand Scorpio's relationship with their shadow, you are ready to understand the final truth about them. Because everything about Scorpio leads to this last reason. And that brings us to the final reason. Reason 20. There is no middle ground with Scorpio. They live in extremes. Scorpio does not exist in the middle. They do not believe in half-truths, half-love, or half-commitment. When a Scorpio chooses you, they choose you completely. They are present, they are loyal, they are emotionally invested. There is no calculation behind it. No emotional hedging, no backup plan. After years of studying Scorpio relationships, one truth stands above all others. Scorpio gives everything or nothing. This is what makes their connections unforgettable. When they love with depth, devotion, and intensity. You feel it in their presence. You feel it in their consistency. You feel it in how seriously they take the bond. But this same intensity is what makes Scorpio dangerous when provoked. Because when that bond is broken, there is no slow fading. There is a clean cut. Scorpio does not linger in emotional limbo. They do not negotiate broken trust. They do not stay where depth is no longer honored. They leave. Not because they stopped caring, but because caring halfway is not an option for them. This is why Scorpio cannot be controlled emotionally. You cannot manipulate someone who refuses to live in the middle. You cannot keep someone who will not accept diluted connection. They are either in your life fully or they are gone completely. And once they are gone, there is no version of them left behind. This all-or-nothing nature is what makes Scorpio both the nicest people you will ever meet and the most dangerous when provoked. Because when they give their soul. And when they withdraw, they take it back entirely. Life lesson for Scorpio. Living in extremes is powerful, but it requires wisdom. Not every situation demands total investment, and not every ending requires complete erasure. Learning when to give fully and when to conserve your energy is what turns intensity into mastery. You do not need to abandon your depth. You need to direct it consciously. If you've ever loved deeply and walked away completely, that wasn't instability. That was alignment with your truth. Comment if this resonates with you. Have you ever chosen to walk away instead of staying halfway? And now that you understand this final truth, everything about Scorpio becomes clear. Conclusion: why Scorpio is both kind and dangerous in 2026. Scorpio is not dangerous because they are cruel. They are dangerous because they are conscious. They feel deeply. They observe carefully. They remember honestly. And they protect their energy fiercely. Their kindness is real because it is intentional. Their danger is real because it is restrained. In 2026, this balance becomes even more important. This is a year when Scorpio stops explaining themselves to people who already showed them who they are. A year when boundaries replace tolerance. A year when depth is no longer offered to those who cannot respect it. Scorpio is not here to be understood by everyone. They are here to live in truth. And truth does not negotiate with comfort. If you are a Scorpio, understand this. Your power is not in how much you endure. It is in how clearly you choose. Choose where to give your loyalty. Choose who deserves your empathy. Choose when to stay and when to walk away without guilt. Being the nicest does not mean being available to everyone. Being dangerous does not mean being destructive. It means knowing your worth and refusing to betray yourself. If this video resonated with you, take a moment and reflect on one thing you are ready to release in 2026. Comment below if this spoke to you. And if you've ever felt misunderstood for protecting your depth, know that you're not alone. This is the Scorpio path. If this resonated with you and you want to understand Scorpio on a deeper level beyond stereotypes and surface traits, subscribe to this channel. The eternal flame of Scorpio. Here we don't talk about Scorpio to entertain. We talk about Scorpio to understand, transform, and grow. New videos are created for those who feel deeply, think intensely, and refuse to live on the surface. If you are ready to explore the real power of Scorpio in 2026, this space is for you. Subscribe the Eternal Flame of Scorpio and stay with us.